In this lesson, we'll learn how to work with Max's Layer Manager, which will help us organize things in our scene. Now that our controls are in place, we wouldn't want to go to the object that's being controlled by the control object and start to move that around, because that can break our control rig and destroy our animation. Alright, so with that said, it'd be great to have a way of making these objects non-selectable, and we actually have a way of doing that. We can utilize Max's Layer Manager. Another great thing about the Layer Manager is that we can hide or show objects very quickly using it. So this is great for, let's say, setting up even things like bones in our characters. A lot of times we don't want to view the bones, but if something needs to be fixed in our control rig, we then want to quickly toggle the visibility of the bones back on so we can fix what needs to be fixed. Alright, so let's say we go ahead and work with this Layer Manager. I'm going to head over to Tools, and here we have it, Manage Layers. And I'll show you another way we can access this panel. But notice by default we have a default layer. And what this means is that everything that we create is going to be tied to this default layer. Alright, so notice this, if we were to go ahead and choose Hide, go ahead and toggle that, everything's going to be hidden in the scene. This check mark right next to the layer means that it is the active layer. So everything that's created in the scene, okay, is going to be tied to that active layer. So let me go ahead and show you this. I'm going to go ahead and select the engine groups, and I'll choose the cab group. I'm just control clicking these. Alright, now we can go ahead and create a new layer with selected objects. It's this first option here. Okay, so now notice where that check mark is. It's right there next to our new layer. Okay, so watch this. Alright, we're going to go ahead and now be able to hide or show our mesh. Alright, the pod and the engines. Now also notice this. If we were to go ahead and, let's say, create a new object, I'll just go ahead and create a new line shape. And I'll right click to exit the tool. Notice this, if we were to go ahead and choose Hide, that line shape is not tied to the default layer anymore. It's tied to whatever layer is checked. So it will also be hidden. Alright, so the important thing to keep in mind, and I'll go ahead and delete this line shape, the important thing to keep in mind here is once you create your layer, if you don't want it to be the active layer, go ahead and choose the default layer. Go ahead and make sure that check mark is still on the default layer. Okay, great. So here I'm going to go ahead and rename this layer. We can just go ahead and select once, select twice, and rename it that way. I'll call this Pod Racer Mesh. Alright, another way of renaming this is to just right click and choose Rename. Now what's great about working with groups and adding them to our Layer Manager is this. If we were to go ahead and expand our layer, notice we can get to each separate object that is contained in the groups we've selected and added to this layer, which is great. So we can go ahead and actually hide certain parts, okay, or even freeze certain parts, making them non-selectable. Now, if we were to go ahead and do the same with, let's say, our curve here, or let's say if we even went ahead and linked another object to this curve. Let me just show you this. I'll go ahead and head over to the Helpers tab, and I'm going to go ahead and create a quick point helper just to show you this. If we were to go back to Link and link this helper to our cab, and then go ahead and select the cab and go ahead and create a new layer, notice the only thing that's going to be underneath that new layer is our cab. It's not going to be this helper. Alright, so again, with groups, everything's going to be contained in that layer. But if it's just a child and a parent relationship, there's no group involved, only that selected object is going to be tied to that layer. So if we wanted to add this helper to the layer, we'd want to make sure the layer is selected and then go ahead and choose Add, and there is the point helper. Now to remove objects from a layer, you'd simply go ahead and select the layer. So what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is create a new layer for these controls. But just to show you this again, let's say if we wanted to add this control object to our Racer Mesh layer. Selecting the control, we can go ahead and choose the Racer Mesh layer, and now go ahead and choose Add, and now it's been removed from layer 01. Alright, but again, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer with our control object. So I'll go ahead and choose the engine controls, the cab control, and go ahead and create a new layer. And then I'm going to go ahead and call this our Pod Racer Controls. Alright, so now we can go ahead and get rid of this layer 1. Now, notice this. We cannot actually delete this layer 1 until the object underneath the layer has been removed. Alright, so we could either delete this object or simply add it to another layer. Being that we don't need this helper just yet, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And now, notice we can go to layer 01 and remove it. Okay, great. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the default layer the active layer. Again, we want to get into the habit of doing that. Otherwise, we can get really confused. Okay, especially when working on a larger control rig. Okay, so now that that's done, we have our objects in place. I'm going to go ahead and now freeze our Pod Racer mesh layer. And notice everything turns gray. That's what's going to happen by default when we freeze this layer. So if you want to go ahead and keep the texture on this object, simply go ahead and right click and choose Object Properties on the layer. And here's the option. Frozen, show frozen in gray. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that and choose OK. And now we can go ahead and see the texture. Alrighty. Okay, so with that being said, I'd like to show you another way of accessing the layer manager. Simply go to a blank spot on your toolbar, right click and choose Layers. And there we have it. Alright, so there's the default layer. We can go ahead and expand this to get to the other layers. And once this is expanded, now we have access of freezing and unfreezing objects. But notice if we were to select our mesh layer, we cannot freeze it until we expand our layer list. Okay, but notice the same tools what we have from the layer manager itself from tools. Alright, well, now we've gone ahead and kind of added some more clarity to our scene by working with our layer manager. So the next task is going to be to work with Max's schematic view and learn how to get around using that.